Yes, it's What a Boast, a celebration of Reeves and Mortimer. Please welcome your hosts for this podcast, MJ Price and Paula Wiseman.
Hello and welcome to Quad a Boast, a podcast dedicated to the work and genius of Vic Reeves and Bob Mortimer. My name is Matt Price, founder of the Reeves and Mortimer Depository of Curious Stuff Facebook group.
And I am Paula Wiseman, founder and creator of the Divine Comedians podcast.
We are joined today by a director and producer who, in an extremely varied career over the last 40-odd years, has directed some iconic music television, such as The Old Grey Whistle Test, Top of the Pops, and Live Aid. Yes, your actual Live Aid. And in the world of entertainment, he's worked with Terry Wogan, Jonathan Ross, and helped create The Crystal Maze. But also, and crucially for this podcast, has directed Vic and Bob in Shooting Stars and the Viz Top Tips videos. Please enter the Novelty Island paddock, David G. Croft.
Hey!
I'm delighted to be here.
Thanks for joining us. First of all, I was just thinking, did you use the G in your name to differentiate yourself from the other David Croft, who people might have heard of?
Must be loads of them.
Absolutely. What happened was when he found out that I was at the BBC, he sent me a memo because back in the 80s, of course, we didn't have emails then. So if we wanted to contact and communicate with other people, we sent memos. And he sent me a memo that said, "I'm not sure my career would have flourished the way it had if my name had been Alfred Hitchcock. Why don't you change your name?" Wow. And I sent a memo back saying, David, my mother would be terribly upset if I did that. But what I will do, I will use the G because my middle name is George. So David G. Croft, as it were, became my screen name. And he was happy about that.
You didn't have people approaching you in the street thanking you for Dad's army.
Listen, seriously, folks, years after I'd left, and years after he'd left, I used to get letters from the BBC, and I'd open them, and they were to him for thanking him for "It Ain't Half Hot, Mum," or "Oh, Mr. Porter." And I wrote to the BBC and I said, "Look, he was there much longer than me. He's far more famous than me, and yet you've got my address, and you're sending his fan mail. Can you please stop?" I also got a medical bill of his inside the BBC, which so occasionally we would get each other's mail.
You didn't get each other's paychecks, though.
Sadly not. But I did have a very surreal moment where the designer of one of his sitcoms, I'd gone in to watch a rehearsal. And the designer came up to me and he said, "Come over here." And we walked toward a man and he said, "David Croft, please meet David Croft."
It's you.
Alternate universe.
Yes, yeah.
So were you always a big fan of TV from a youngster?
I was. And when I knew I was doing this, you kindly invited me on this podcast. I began to think back, what did I watch as a kid? I've got my list, of course, because, I was a kid in the late 50s. So I watched things like Champion the Wonder Horse, Cheyenne, The Lone Ranger, Bewitched, The Beverly Hillbillies, Z-Cars, things like that. There were lots of American comedy shows, half-hour comedy shows. There were lots of half-hour westerns like Wagon Train, Rawhide with Clint Eastwood. So lots of things like that, as well as, of course, I'd grown up on, kids programs like Ragtag and Bobtail, and Andy Pandy, and, all of that stuff. Of course, TV, when I was a little lad, TV didn't start till 4:45. And it went off at 11 o'clock at night. So it was all that kind of stuff. Loved war films, loved thrillers, I developed. My father was very interested in films, and he used to make me watch the credits. So I began to realize that films were made by people, and I became quite fascinated I got quite fascinated in that, and I got fascinated in how on earth did they do it. And I used to watch films and think, they must have hundreds of cameras. There's all these different shots, little realizing the process in which films are made or television was made. So, yes, and I watch lots of quiz shows like Double Your Money, Crisscross Quiz, Ask the Family, all this sort of, harmless, good family entertainment. And I became fascinated in the area of in films and television. So as a young kid, and it continued through school really.
Could have been very different if there'd been reality TV, I suppose, back in those days.
I think it might have put me off. But no, I was fascinated. And when I became a teenager, I say, Top of the Pops was the thing you watched on a Thursday, and I became enthralled in, again, how do you do that? How do you direct this stuff? And then there was a very significant, when I was 17, 18, there was a very significant series called In Concert that was produced and directed by Stanley Dorfman. And I used to watch those, Neil Young and Joni Mitchell and Randy Newman. I mean, the Stanley Dorfman basically booked all the singer-songwriters who were anybody from California. But I would watch that, and I began to think, particularly, music directing can be an art, because I'd never seen any directing like Stanley Dorfman's. He was a brilliant director, so that also created a spark of interest for me.
Yeah, I suppose the first medium of TV that really started experimenting with like effects in directing was like Top of the Pops, so music TV, when they'd spin the screens around and all sorts of things.
Yeah, well, of course they engineers invented a thing called Quantel, which of course then the directors went mad with in the 70s. And yes, they would do all, you're right, all kinds of effects that when I watch it now make me feel sick. Yeah. Of course, I was of a generation of directors in the early 80s. We wouldn't have anything to do with that. We were strictly purists.
Probably old school.
Well, old school or new school. I wouldn't have star filters on the cameras, and I certainly wouldn't have Quantel. I wanted it. I think maybe from an early age, and I suppose what I'd picked up from Stanley Dorfman was trying to create an aura of authenticity about what you were watching. I think that's what it was.
So how did you first get into the industry?
Well, what had happened was I had gone to Liverpool University. I'd gone to Bath University, but I didn't like it and left, and then arranged my own transfer to Liverpool University and lived in Liverpool. Even though I was from there, I didn't live at home. I spent my 3 years living in the middle of Liverpool, and I got my degree. And I decided in my third year I wanted to be a director, but I was pretty honest with myself and said, well, look, you've still got no idea how this all works. And I discovered that I could if I could get into the Royal College of Art, they ran an MA in film and television, and I could get a degree from the Department of Education. So that's what I did. I got in, moved to London, got a flat with my then girlfriend, and did 3 years in the RCA learning about directing, but also importantly, learning about editing. And I quickly discovered that if you want to be a good director, the best thing to do is spend a lot of time editing footage together. When I left after my 3 years, I got a job as an assistant film editor, and I did that for 2 years. And during that 2 years, I applied, because writing to the BBC in those days was like, you might as well not bother because, you barely got a reply. But I discovered they ran a course called the Trainee Assistant Producers course.
Mm.
And I went to see somebody about it, and they said at the BBC, and he said to me, he was the head of current affairs. He said, I wouldn't bother everything. You wouldn't get in. They get thousands of applications. But I applied, and I got an interview, and then I got another interview, and then I got a third interview, and then they offered me a place.
Wow.
And a trainee assistant producer was a fantastic opportunity. They basically gave you a 2-year contract, and they said, if you can find yourself a job at the end of those 2 years or during the 2 years, that's your challenge. So serendipity, really. On my application form, I had put down under my interests, I'd put down I was interested in rock music and I played the guitar. So my first posting was to a brand new program, which hadn't been made yet, and it had a temporary title called Son of Whistle Test because it was coming out of that production team. I joined this show, which was fantastic art music show. We were so far ahead of the curve, nobody knew we were there. It was called Riverside. It was a wonderful show, and there were no rules. There was no format, and we could, we had all kinds of amazing bands. There'd be a band on, we'd have people like Fire Engines, Fad Gadget. We had the first New Order on doing their first television appearance. We had, just everybody, poets, dancers, mime artists. It was brilliant. And I was an assistant producer on that. I was making films. And the first film, the producer, I'd only been there a few days, and the producer said, I want you to go and make a film with Stuart Copeland from The Police. I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. So I was making short films, and then it was a 13-part series. And after 6 episodes, I went into the office one day, and the producer, John Burrows, said to me, David, would you like to direct the studio? Would you like to direct the rest of the series? And I said, can I think about it, John? And he said, yes, you've got half an hour. So I went and sat in the corner of the production office, and I thought, this is too good to be true. So I went back and said, yes. So the director who had to leave, a really talented director called Roy Chapman, who was based in Bristol, he said to me, I'll teach you how to direct music with 5 cameras in a week. And that's what he did. So I got through my first show, and I was terrified. I got through my second show. I got through to the end of the series. And then they said, would you like to direct the second series? And that was me. Then I was off and running. And then I had to apply, like all trainee assistant producers. A job came up in the department that was making Riverside. Mm-hmm. And I went for the job, and I got the job. So within 9 months of joining, I was permanent, and I directed, a series and a half. And it was, people stopped me, and other trainee assistant producers stopped me in the canteen and said, have you just directed an entire series? And I went, yes. So it was, I just realized that I also had a knack, as well as being able to direct with one camera, short films. I realized I had a knack. I could direct 5 and 6 cameras, and I could direct music. I realized I could do it. Yeah. That was me. So I did the next 2 series of Riverside, and then I started doing concerts. Not live concerts, recorded. My first 2 concerts were from Sefton Park with Big Country, and then Nick Hayward. Then I was asked to do some live concerts. Did a live concert with with 10cc, Aztec camera, and the Cure. So I realized I could direct live too, because not all television directors can do it. Some of them don't want to do live TV, but I realized I absolutely loved it. So, I was off and running. And then when Live Egg came up, myself and the late Tom Corcoran and John D. Smith, who was based in Birmingham, we were asked to be the concert directors. So yeah, everything was flying. And I'd made a series that I'd co-produced called Acting, and I'd made one of the episodes lots of people remember was Acting in Film with Michael Caine. So everything was going really well. But Mrs. Thatcher had decided the BBC was too big. So the BBC said, well, we'll cut 2 departments. And the department I was in, Network Features, they closed it down. Nobody lost their jobs. Everybody was absorbed somewhere else. But I went to Light Entertainment. And that's how I wound up on Wogan, because I'd had live experience. But I wasn't happy there. They wouldn't let me direct Top of the Pops. My time directing Top of the Pops was much later when I was freelance. They wouldn't let me do it. There was a hierarchy. And I was some Johnny come lately who was trying to jump the queue. They didn't like that. And I also went to Gareth Gwenham and said, and I also wanted to direct some sitcoms. And they went, well, you can't do that. You need to get in the queue. So I decided, thought about it carefully, talked to my wife and thought, I'm feeling stifled. They were offering me things like Roland Rat, which I didn't want to do. And I said, no. They offered me Jim Will Fix It. I said, no.
Close escape.
Hindsight.
Yeah, so I was feeling creatively that, I was being boxed into a corner where I didn't want to be. So I went freelance. That was that. And so I left the BBC in September of 1988 and set out. I was terrified, set out into the world of freelance television.
So how far are we from the Crystal Maze starting from that?
We're not that far. What happened was about 1987, John Fisher, who was the executive producer of Wogan, he'd been asked to produce this live show called Challenge Annika.
Oh, yeah.
That was being made by Chatsworth Television. Now, this was going to take a whole day, and she was being challenged to put an orchestra on the Thames and with an ice rink. She was going to have to do all these things. And the BBC was in its infancy when it came to doing co-productions. It didn't really know how to do them. So John Fisher came into my office one day and he said, right, David, I want you to go to this production company called Chatsworth, and I want you to tell them that you're going to be the edit director on the day, because they're going to be shooting Annika live, but we can only dip in and out of during the day, what she's up to until the evening when hopefully they get the orchestra. We get the orchestra on the Thames. We'll go live for the finale. So I went to Chatsworth and I met a man called Malcolm Hayworth. And Malcolm and I, he ran Chatsworth. He'd created Challenge Annika, but he also was the executive producer and producer of Treasure Hunt.
Yeah.
So Malcolm knew about Malcolm had produced 3 movies, but he loved action adventure shows. So we got on. So cut forward 18 months, and he rings me up one day and he said, David, could you come in? I want to talk to you. So I went in and he said, look, I've got the rights to this program. He said, it's called Fort Boyard, and I've shot a pilot. Have a look. So I looked at this pilot. It was shot in a studio. Richard O'Brien was the presenter. And at the end of it, he said, what do you think? Are you interested in doing that? I went, no. It looks a bit, I don't believe the end. You've got all these tigers, threatening the contestants. I said, will the tigers ever eat the contestants? He said, no. I said, well, that's what I don't like about it.
I'm not interested.
So he said, okay. And, it was, and then not long afterwards, he called me up again and he said, we can't do Fort Boyard because he'd got a commission from Channel 4, you see. We can't do Fort Boyard because the actual fort, which is off La Rochelle, because it was a French format, it won't be ready for when Channel 4 want us to make the first series. So would you like to get involved in creating something that's based loosely on Fort Boyard, but isn't? And I said, well, that sounds interesting. So I got involved with Malcolm and we spent a lot of time going back and forth to Paris, trying to work out, because the French were very twitchy, you see. They didn't want us to create something that looked like Fort Boyard because that could give them a problem selling it elsewhere. Anyway, so we ended up beginning to develop something called the Crystal Maze. And James Dillon, who's a wonderful designer, Malcolm brought James on, and the three of us began to work out this idea. And a funny story, James and I were asked to go to Paris one day. So we flew over and we got to the French production company who Chatsworth were dealing with. And they said, right, we want to show you something. So we got in a car and they drove us to an industrial part of Paris. And James and I are not knowing what's going on. And we get out the car and they take us to this warehouse and open the doors. And there is a crystal dome. And we said, what's this? And they said, well, we're not really sure. We built it and now we don't know what to do with it. So James and I looked at each other and we went back and reported to Malcolm and we said, we think we've got the finale of the show. So, cut a long story short, we developed the basis of the Crystal Maze, a team of 6 playing games in 4 zones, winning crystals and each crystal was a certain amount of time that you would get in the crystal dome. We loved Richard O'Brien and there was no danger that Richard was going to do it. But the important thing with Richard was he was going to play a part. He wasn't going to be like a normal presenter, hello and good evening and welcome. Richard was, if you remember, he was Reckless Rick, who lived in the Crystal Maze. So all of that was we created. And it helped, I think it also helped to give a slightly otherness to the Crystal Maze that people liked. Even though everybody knew it was a TV show, but there was something about it. And also I think, you may have seen the remakes with Richard Ayoade. Brave effort, but everybody knew who Richard was. Whereas Richard O'Brien was who's this ball bloke? People didn't really know him. So got involved in that. And it was a mammoth shoot. It was a huge task. I was also involved heavily with creating games. It was the most fantastic challenge for a director because I wanted to shoot it. James Dillon, we were working with James on this set. And I said, James, I want to be able to shoot in 360 degrees. I want to be able to point the cameras in any direction. Working with Mike Sutcliffe, the lighting director, I said, I want high key lighting. I don't want flat television lighting. I want it to be film-like. If Richard steps into shadow, that's fine. I want people to be able to step in and out of shadow. We've got to give it atmosphere. And we made that first series, and it was a hit. It went to #1 for Channel 4. And I remained, with it, directing it or producing it and creating games and directing and producing the last 2 series. And it was the most wonderful time. Everybody who worked on it loved it. And it was a creative challenge. It was 5 weeks hard work and then 3 months, editing the shows together. You wouldn't get that time now. In fact, when they brought it back, they made the production team make 2 a day.
Wow.
I had 2 days to make 1. And that's why I think the production values are so high. And if you watch it now, it's still, occasionally I'll see it on Challenge TV and I'll think, that stands up. That stands up. That could go out now. So it was a wonderful experience for me.
It was a proper badge of honour, though, wasn't it? It was a proper badge of honour being on it. I remember one of my friends from school did it, and she was like, she had her crystal and everything. She was so proud of it.
The contestants loved it. After the first series, Channel 4 came to us and said, so many kids like this. Can you also do a kids special? And that's what we did.
Yeah.
Well, because we were adamant we were making the Crystal Maze for adults. We were not making it for children. Mm. And I think kids love it when they latch onto a show they know that's not made for them.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, quite often kids realize when they're being patronized by program makers. And I think that was one of the clever things, as I say, kids watched it and thought, you're not making this for me. You're not patronizing me. But boy, do I want to have a go on it. So that was why that's why the Crystal Maze from series 2 onwards got a Tuesday repeat earlier on in the evening. And then hence, we did the kids show.
It was must watch TV.
Yeah.
And I think it was a real purple patch for Channel 4. And obviously it's just before satellite TV really came in and became a contender. And another show from the late 80s and early 90s that appeared on Late Night Channel 4 was Vic Reeves' Big Night Out, of course. Were you aware of them and that show at the time?
I actually went to a performance in the theatre of the Big Night Out when Channel 4 and Michael Grade and various bigwigs were attending.
Right.
And everybody in the audience knew that if the boys pulled it off, they were going to get a series. Yeah. So I was there that night and
is that the Albany Empire?
Yes.
Yeah.
That's right. And realized that Vic and Bob were definitely mad, but they definitely were able to create their own distinctive comedic world, which at times was baffling, but seductive all the same. So yes, I was there that night and would watch it.
Yeah. And obviously, eventually, you became involved with them on Shooting Stars.
I did. What happened? What happened was that I'd always been a generalist. I never wanted to be linked with just one type of program making, and and I was loving doing Crystal Maze and the other things I was doing, but I was hankering after doing some comedy. And what happened was Channel X asked me to do a pilot with Jonathan Ross for the BBC that was never commissioned. And this pilot, by the way, had Peter Cook was on it. And in fact, turns out to be Peter Cook's last appearance on television.
Right.
So he made this, and the BBC passed on it. Now, it was made out of Channel X. So I'd met Alan Mark. And I went to see Alan, and said, "Look, I really want to do some comedy, and I'd love to work with Vic and Bob. What are the chances?" Because directors would often do that. You go and see a producer of a show that you admired, and try and talk them into giving you a job. But I'd seen it, and Alan. It must have been a couple of weeks later. Alan said, "Well, the lads would like to meet you. Can you meet them in a pub in Soho?" And I said, "Yes, okay." So very nervous, I go to this pub, and there are the boys, and we just start chatting. And they liked the Crystal Maze, but we chatted about music, and we chatted about football, and we chatted about comedy. And then I went home, and then I don't know how long it was after that. I get a call from Channel X saying, would I like to do the Shooting Stars Christmas special? And that's how it started. So I did the Shooting Stars Christmas special, which was an epic. We had, you guys have seen it. There's that opening sequence that took an entire day to shoot.
Wow.
In the biggest TV studio in TV Centre, TC1. And I had a Technocrane in there. I had everything in there. Because the boys said, we want to go from sequence to sequence without any cuts. And that was like, okay. But, we had the boys, we had Ulrika coming down a Hollywood staircase with guys in top hats. We had, and then we had...
is that with the diner with Mark Lamar?
We had Mark Lamar appearing on a Kirby wire, dancing around, singing "Mr. Boombastic." It was, I can't tell. It was amazing because, it was great. As I say, I had this huge Technocrane in there, and we had sliding walls that you couldn't see. Oh my God! But it worked, and then the show itself was the next day, and it went really well. It won a Silver Rose of Montreux, and I don't know whether you guys know, but the music for that opening sequence was pretty much written and produced by Pete Bakey, who have you
Lovely
guys talked to Pete?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes, he was great. I went to the session with. That was a hoot doing that session, and Ulrika was there, and Mark Lamar. It was great. So that went well. It was a big challenge for me. It went well, and then where are we then? We get that was in 1995, I think, and then. The next thing that happens is I get a call. Do I want to do these two sell-through VHS videos, top tips, based on the Viz column?
Yeah.
And that was going to be, I think it was 4 days single camera sketch shooting, and then 3 days of multi-camera shooting in the studio. So it was quite a schedule. It was a lot of work, but it was great fun. It was, as I say, it was very hard work, but the boys were incredibly professional and organised and knew their lines. The weather was fantastic.
Where was the location, David? It was like a country house.
I can't remember. I think it was near Kent.
Probably that's their stomping ground.
Stayed on home turf.
It was near Kent, because the production assistant Andrea, that I work with a lot, she lived locally, so she was delighted, and so that was really good fun, and it went really well. And there's one story I must tell you, which I wrote down. Let me just find it. It's that's right. We were all staying in a hotel but we had the weekend off. And what we discovered was that actually on the Saturday of the weekend we were supposed to be off, England were going to play Holland in the famous Euro 96 match that we won 4-1.
Yeah.
And Vic said to me, David, we're thinking of watching this. Would you like to, come back to the hotel and watch it with us? And I said, yes. He said, now, this is what's going to happen. He said, I'm bringing the Ritz crackers. Bob's bringing the luncheon meat. Will you bring the tomatoes? So like you do in the Vic and Bob universe, I went, okay, lads. And I turned up and we sat in the bar with pints, eating Ritz crackers with luncheon meat and tomatoes on top of them.
That's a very Vic and Bob meal.
Isn't it? Bob and his meats.
Absolutely. And sometimes you never, sometimes with the boys you think, are they testing me?
Yeah.
So I was there with the tomatoes, and we had a thoroughly entertaining, enjoyable afternoon with our crackers. But all the more because, of course, England had the famous victory. Although you probably know, Bob is much more interested in football than Vic.
Yeah.
Bob's was an insane Middlesbrough fan. He probably still is.
I think he still is. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, go on, Matt.
I was going to say, I didn't realise it until really recently, because I thought I knew everything about Vic and Bob's career, because there was a VHS tape that came out at the time, which I purchased, obviously, and it wasn't until in the last few months someone drew to my attention the second one was on Amazon, because it was never released at the time, and it's a whole new episode.
Yeah. That's right. It was just this sell-through video that I think, I can't remember the name of the production company, but I think they'd gone to Viz and said we could do this, based on the column. So I think there was a collaboration financially, and that's how it came about. But it was great. It was very good for me because with Shooting Stars, apart from, shooting the epic beginning on the Christmas show, it was all studio. This was an opportunity for me to work with Vic and Bob shooting sketches. So that was very interesting. And then that became very helpful when they asked me to direct Shooting Stars Series 3, because again, we had a block of sketch shooting, so I knew how they worked. I knew how they liked to work, so I was prepped for that. Yeah.
The other thing with Top Tips, which in that second film, is a very, very brief one-line appearance from Jeremy Hardy, the late great Jeremy Hardy. I don't know how that came about.
Which, Matt, I can't remember.
No, he's a coal man or something.
No recollection of that, because. As I say, it was a long time ago. It was very full on for everybody. And yes, until you mentioned that, I'd completely forgotten.
Yeah, so you go on to Shooting Star Series 3, which was 1997, taken over from some guy called Mark Mylard. I don't know what happened to him. That's right. I don't know what happened to him.
Don't know what happened to him.
Yeah, disappeared.
Disappeared to obscurity. So you went back to that. So you did the sketches.
Yes.
I think Series 3 is when they came into their own. I think the earlier series they'd use a lot of stock footage from old documentaries and things but they actually started performing their own sketches out and about.
They did. So some of which were axed because sometimes the boys would decide they didn't like a sketch or it didn't feel right. So sometimes, there are a few sketches kicking around that never saw the light of day. But again, those sketches were a mixture of things shot on location, and sometimes we would shoot extra things on the morning of the show. I remember shooting an animal hospital sketch, which they decided they wanted to shoot, and it was on the morning of what we were going to shoot one of the episodes. So that would happen occasionally. But the bulk of the sketches for the series we'd shot on location.
Yeah. So when you're in the studio, I mean, it seems a simple question. How do you direct Vic and Bob? Because obviously they can go off on their own tangents.
Okay. Working with Vic and Bob was fascinating, enjoyable, funny, but utterly exhausting. Vic and Bob have a shorthand understanding with each other that, try as you may, it's very difficult to penetrate. And even Alan Mark, the producer who'd worked with them a lot more than I had. At the end of the series, Alan and I would just collapse on the desk. It was so. What was it like working with? Well, the one thing, once the boys decided they were going to do something and you rehearsed it, they pretty much stuck to it. They were very good like that. The effort was sometimes getting to the point where everything was agreed. But again, other than that, they were very well prepared. I mean, you might be surprised to know that on Shooting Stars Series 3, I didn't start camera blocking with Vic and Bob, but without the guests until 2:00. Right. And that would include rehearsing the big piece at the end. So then we would finish at 5:30, and we would go and have dinner, and then we'd be back and start at 7. So we weren't over rehearsed, but I just had to be, I usually had the same crew, sound, lighting, cameras, and production, vision mixer, production assistant, and I would just be, incredibly well prepared. So I was ready. I was always ready if the boys went off piste, as it were. And they didn't do that very often. They were very good. Often, if anything was going to develop that maybe we hadn't thought about, it would often be with Mark Lamar, or Ulrika, or Big Baby. Things would happen there, and suddenly we'd think we've drifted into ad lib land here. But no, the boys had this wonderful talent of looking like they were making it up from second to second, but actually they had it all. They'd planned it all, and that's a real comedic talent, I think. So it wasn't chaos, and if it looked chaos on the screen, brilliant, because that's what we wanted everybody to feel like. Anything could happen. Suddenly, like I say, I always remember there was one gag, can't remember who the guest was, where suddenly, Vic jumps up, goes over, and cuts open his chair that he's been sitting on, and it's full of false teeth. That's the kind of thing, that's the kind of thing that would happen, and made it great to work on. But as I say, tiring. It was because you wanted to get, I didn't want any technical issues to get in the way of what they were doing. I never wanted to say, hold it, lads, sorry, there's been some kind of issue / whatever. Do you mind doing that again? Never wanted to do that. And the whole crew knew that, it was happening once in front of your eyes, in a sense.
But they obviously trusted your skill set to, portray exactly what they wanted.
Yeah, I think they did. I think they did. Certainly, with the previous shows that we'd worked on, I think they realised that I was absolutely capable, and they would. I think when working with new people, they might feign, a sort of vague knowledge, but they would certainly go through people's CVs, so they certainly knew what I'd done. And comedians are I've always found comedians are the most demanding artists to work with, because they often feel that, only they are the arbiters of what's funny. And sometimes, certainly with doing sketches, there were those moments where we'd do a take, and at the end of the take, they'd look at me, I'd look at them, and I'd say, "Oh, I'm not sure about that, lads. Do you think we should go again?" And you would get two responses: either, "Yeah, you're absolutely right, let's go again," or "No." They look at each other. "No, we're happy with that." So you had to sort of develop a way of, because it was Vic and Bob's world, and. In a sense, we were all observers to that. We were all handmaidens, as it were, to getting that world on the screen. And they could be, I must tell you this story because there were times when you thought the boys are this is a kind of slapstick, but it wasn't. I would say pretty much all of it was carefully thought out. And it is a good example where we were shooting a sketch. And the sketch was, we're supposed to be in France in the 17th century. And Ulrika is dressed as if she's from the court of, the Sun King. Yeah. And everybody else, all the other actors, Big Baby, Mark Lamar, they're all dressed in hussars costumes. And into this sketch enters Captain Egg. Now this is a man in a hussar uniform.
You, David, but it was Lance Corporal Boiled Egg.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you so much. Lance Corporal Boiled Egg appears with a giant egg on his head. And as we were shooting this, Vic got very agitated, almost, and slightly annoyed. And I'd never seen him get like that. And he called the costume lady over and he said, "The hat on Lance Corporal Egg's head is wrong. You haven't looked carefully enough at my drawing." And she'd obviously looked at Vic's drawing and thought it was sort of mainly, scribble, and she could take artistic license. Oh. No. He was most put out, and I've never seen him angry. Never saw him angry again. But he was most put out that Lance Corporal's Egg's hat was incorrect. Anyway, that was a slightly awkward moment, but we then got on with it. But that was, to me, I thought, yes, everything's down to the finest detail, and we mustn't assume that you won't notice. So, yeah. Anyway, the sketch was completed, and we were all happy by the end of it.
He was famed for that. It's come up a few times within the scripts. He'd draw his intricate diagrams.
Yes.
Got out the prop department and the costume department who had to create those.
Yeah, and when you first see one, you just think, "Oh, this is just a quick scribble," but actually, it wasn't.
He's an artist, isn't he?
A lot of work gone into it. Yeah.
There's a lot of work gone into it, and so we need to be looking at this very carefully. The shows were great, exhausting when the show was finished, we go to the green room and unwind. And when the series was finished, we then went into the editing process. What tended to happen with the edit process was that Alan would do a rough cut close to half an hour. And then that rough cut would be sent to the boys by VHS. They'd watch it, send their notes back. And then, say Alan would have a day to do that. Then I would come in for my day to spruce it up and make it all look beautiful. So there were no jump cuts, and we put in all the cutaways and reaction shots. And so that happened. And then we would have one more day where we would mix the sound, and we would put on captions and opening titles and closing titles. So post-production was, and it probably still is, quite quick. It was quite quick.
Yeah.
But I mean, you've worked, looking at some of the other people you've worked with. You were talking about the comedy people there, like Pete Bakey. I mean, the likes of Morwenna Banks, Jack Doherty, Emo Phillips. I mean, what was Emo like to work with?
Weird. Weird. And I worked with Emo twice. I did something for London Weekend, which he appeared in, and then I did a concert with him, a whole evening's performance from the Playhouse Theatre that's on the Thames, the one, and that concert always, if it ever gets mentioned, there's a sharp intake of breath from my wife, because we were on holiday in Portugal and I'd agreed that I needed to come back a day early.
Oh my God.
What I didn't realize was that I'd thrown the return airfare tickets away.
Oh, man.
So that when Louise and the au pair and our two very small children got to the airport, she couldn't find the tickets because I'd thrown them away, and had to wait till everybody else had been checked in. Anyway, so Emo, yes, again, someone else who you were, when working with him and talking to him, were trying to read the runes, really, read the signs, because again, Emo, someone who created his own very off-kilter world, didn't he? So yeah, and the producer on that was Juliet Blake on that series, and Trevor Hopkins. Gosh, I remember so that was a whole. I think that was a 1 hour special. But yes, I did work with Morwenna, lovely, and then of course not through Morwenna, but I worked with her again much later on when I directed, took over from Mark Mylod. No, he only shot the beginning of the Baddiel syndrome for Sky. I came in halfway through that, and Mark had shot an opening sequence with Stephen Fry and David Baddiel, and I came in again, and of course Morwenna was in that. That was my first sitcom, actually, which was another challenge. I remember meeting David Baddiel in Groucho's, and he said to me, "I want it like Friends," he said. "I want it very fast, but I want it very loose. Okay, I don't want lots of mid shots of me." And I said, "Okay, that's fine." So I scripted it like that. And when we were in the first rehearsal, because again, with the way sitcoms normally work is you have 4 days of rehearsal, and then you go into the studio and shoot it, and then you have a day off and you start again. So the first time I'm in the studio and we're blocking it through, the rehearsal stops, and David Baddiel says, David, what shot are we on? I said, oh, we're on a 2-shot. He said, no, I think a close-up of me would be much better. And that happened several times. So just went back to the standard British sitcom scripting, of being on the star when he said something really funny.
These comedians can't help themselves.
I'm afraid not. No, they know it's that they're the money, and the funny lines are the money, but it's true though. That we are a bit like, as Pauline Kael once said about British cinema way back. She said the British use close-ups like the Americans use ketchup all over their food. Way too many.
But before we move away from Shooting Stars altogether, are there any guests that stand out to you, either because they were a joy to work with or the absolute opposite?
It's funny. I've got a lot of great memories. I remember Adam Ant was a bit depressed and not, could have been more fun. Yeah. I remember Robbie Coltrane telling me off, as it were, over talkback in front of the whole audience, because I was trying to get, at the end of the show, you always get cutaways, listening shots of the people. And Robbie wore glasses, and all the way through the show, his glasses were on, his glasses were off. So I said to the floor manager, right, we're going to do cutaway now with Robbie with his glasses on. So we did that. And I said, now we want to do one with Robbie with his glasses off. And Robbie said, oh, to hell with it. No one's going to notice. Well, I was just so keen always to get things right. I remember we had Wolf on from Gladiators.
Oh, yeah.
And
what a legend.
I know. You see, but he made that mistake of trying to be funny, and you don't.
Yeah.
What you do as a guest on Shooting Stars is let the boys poke fun at you.
Yeah, let them do their thing.
Don't go head to head on the comedic stakes with the boys. So, but no, that's about it. Really, I think I was just always so concentrated on them and getting their performances, because in a way the guests were a little superfluous, really. I certainly remember Janet Street Porter being a good sport when she had to wear those enormous wings. Yeah. And the boys turned on the giant fan. That was good. But anyway, no, not too many great stories there, I'm afraid. It's just
I said it before. I mean, it looks like a quiz. It smells like a quiz, but it's not really a quiz. That's it. Yeah, on paper, it's in Rage of Times. It's a half-hour quiz show. It's not really.
It was Vic and Bob's postmodernist version of some kind of quiz, wasn't it? But that's what it was doing, and and perhaps one of my favourite bits was always the dove from above, which was insane, really. But there you go.
Yeah. So where did your career go? After that, with your syndrome, really.
Yeah. Carried on doing lots of different things. As I went to BBC Belfast, BBC Northern Ireland, and directed a sitcom there called Give My Headpiece. And what else? Then it was maybe around about the early noughties, I was beginning to think perhaps I'd like to do something a bit different. I was, television was changing quite a lot. Directors were having their creative input reduced.
Yeah.
And I didn't like that because I'd been spoiled. I'd had so much experience as a director of being in the production right from the beginning and being able to contribute creatively. And the notion of just being hired in at the end like a plumber didn't appeal to me. So I began to look around for something else. And fortunately, a friend of mine told me about the NFTS, and they were looking for a head of television to take over. The course had only been running 3 or 4 months, and they were looking for someone. And I did an interview there, went to see them, talked to them about it, did an interview, and they offered me the job, and it seemed like a great opportunity. Sideways step. I had no teaching qualifications, but neither did any of the heads of department at the NFTS. But everybody there was a professional with excellent CVs to go with it. And the NFTS was a practical teaching facing institution, which appealed to me. And there's a very low number of students in each year. When I was there, it was 6. When I left, it was 10. The place has got lots and lots of equipment. So I realized that I could teach people to make television entertainment, but by them actually making it. I wasn't interested in spending hours and hours and hours talking to people in seminar rooms. So that's what I did. And I didn't realize at the time I was going to have to battle to integrate the television department into the school, because it had been set up really by the late Nick Powell, who was the director. And I think Nick's vision was that the TV department would operate in some corner of the school and not bother anybody else. But I didn't quite see it like that. So I spent a lot of time, as I say, a lot of time coercing management to let other departments collaborate with us to make it a much more all-rounded experience for the students. And I was there for 15 years, and I think I left the department in rude health. I'd had a fantastic time there. Really enjoyed it. We won lots of awards, TV shows that students made. The other thing I'm most proud of is the department. The department wasn't known by the television entertainment industry when I first started, but it certainly was when I left. So that was great. After 15 years, I just thought, well, I've had enough now. I've had a fabulous career, really happy with it, but I now want to do what I want to do when I want to do it. So I left in December of 2022.
I think it's a wonderful thing. I mean, a lot of people want to get into filmmaking, and they make their short films, and they think they're going to be a next great director. But light entertainment when it's at its best, it's a fabulous thing. We've all grown up on it.
Yeah.
And when you're young, you don't differentiate between it's just straight TV, whatever the genre is. And it's great to bring the new generation through.
And one of the things I loved, I mean, yes, there were times early on when I had, pretensions about making films, but then I actually realized I like making stuff. Do I want to sit around for 3 years trying to get a film? No.
Yeah.
Do I want to make television? Yes. And do I want to make lots of it? Yes. And I was very lucky to make lots of television, some of which is well remembered. So I don't have any regrets, really. I suppose the only I wouldn't call it a regret, but sometimes it used to annoy me that work on television entertainment wasn't wasn't given the artistic credit that it should have been. But hey, it's as I used to say to my TV students, I'd say, look, most television entertainment's like pop music. It's ephemeral. It's in the charts for a while, and then it's then it's not, and then everybody moves on. I say films are a bit more like classical music. They hang around for a lot longer, but we make pop music, and if we can have a hit, great.
Yeah.
That's the thing about learning a skill. You don't want to be learning from textbooks. Do you know what I mean? You want to be learning from someone who's been there, done it, bought the t-shirt, sold the t-shirt, owns the franchise.
Yeah. You can't learn television, and particularly entertainment. You can't learn that just listening to some bloke telling you about
sitting in the classroom.
You've got to go and make it, because then you realize what's involved. Then you realize what's involved, and it's one of the things, of course, that is true is that you can find lots of textbooks on being a director. Try and find one on being a producer. There aren't any. You know why? Because it's trying to talk about editorial decisions are very difficult, and to giving concrete examples. And again, I used to say to the students, you want an example of producing? Okay, we just shot an interview with Tom Hanks, and we shot 12 minutes, but we've only got room for 6. Which 6 minutes do we take out?
Yeah,
that's producing, and I can't tell you that in a book. You need to be assessing those 12 minutes and thinking about the context, the show, and making all kinds of decisions about what's more interesting. Is this more interesting than that? That's producing. And I can't teach you that. You have to do it.
Yeah.
It's so awful to have to do it, though, isn't it? To chop. They say kill your darlings, making this 10-minute piece, and you can only use 4 minutes of it. You're like, it's awful. It's heartbreaking. Certainly for every director in television, the first time the producer comes in and tells you to cut 2 minutes out of it, you just think, but this is the most wonderful piece of television you've ever seen. Yeah. They don't just go cut 2 minutes. Okay. And then once you get over that, you realize that's the ball game, and then that makes you, that next time you make that film, you get it, you make it, you try to copper, sort of copper plate it so that it's so good, it's harder to do that. No, it's a skill in itself, isn't it, to be able to do that?
You made your analogy to pop music a minute ago, and so I know your music is still a big love of yours, and you do your radio show, which you present, and I've seen some of your playlists, and your taste is immaculate.
Love doing my radio show. Yes, on every other Thursday night on Marlow FM 97.5, folks. It's great fun because I get to choose what I want to play, and I love that. Keeps me in touch with music.
Yeah, I did it myself for many years online. It's a joy to do that and just put your own playlist together. I love it.
And I still do it now. I'm working in radio myself now. It's great though, isn't it? Not having to play to a playlist. You can literally just play whatever you want to do, whatever's floating your boat. You find new music. Even people will suggest things to you. It's great.
Look, I absolutely love it, and I've been doing a lot of photography since I retired. Doing a lot of photography, and I'm really pleased. Great piece of news the other day in that the Glasgow Photographic Arts have accepted one of my photographs for an exhibition that's coming up in November on the urban world. So I'm thrilled about that.
Fantastic.
So, doing lots of stuff.
Yeah, but before we finish, and we did mention it briefly earlier, since we're talking about music, at the time of recording this, it's the 40th anniversary of Live Aid, and there's lots of documentaries on TV about it at the moment.
Yeah, 40 years. God.
I mean, just at the time, how much notice were you given? So I know it was all thrown together very quick that you would be doing that Live Aid.
We weren't given very much notice. I don't know. It was like 8 weeks, 10 weeks, which in television terms is insane.
I suppose because you didn't even know who was going to be playing.
We didn't know. So yes, we had the production. We had to go into a planning phase for a production we didn't know, and we didn't know what the content was going to be at that time. We also had to cobble together equipment because the BBC plans everything out very carefully, and certainly across the summer, all of the outside broadcast units and facilities they have are all allocated, and then suddenly here's this concert. So all of that had to be sorted out, and as I say, in the end, we worked in battered equipment, and I was saying to somebody the only day us three directors in Wembley Arena, we only had 8 cameras, which is insane. Now you'd have about 97.
Oh, yeah.
But maybe that was part of what made it great, is that it hadn't been trailed for weeks and weeks and weeks. It was not over rehearsed. There was the great thing, I think, was just an element of spontaneity about it all. The three directors, for a long time, we didn't know what songs our bands were going to play. There were no rehearsals. So all of that experience that I'd had directing music and directing music live, really came to the fore doing that. And I got married on July the 4th, and I had asked my wife if it was okay that we didn't go on a really nice honeymoon because I was going to do this concert. And she said, all right. She said, okay, providing I'm a member of the production team. So Louise was, and her job was, ferrying rock stars up and down in the lift to be interviewed.
Wow.
So we got married on the 4th. We had a few days in the Lake District, and stayed at my mum's for a day, and then I was back. So it was fabulous time.
Because you also had to coordinate with the States as well, didn't you? The American broadcasters. That's a first.
Fortunately, Tom and John and I didn't get involved in that. We left that to Mike Appleton, and John Burrows and Trevor Dan. They were the ones doing all of that stuff. We were, we could keep out of that.
Yeah.
We just concentrated on what we were going to do on the day.
You had enough going on.
We had enough going on, yeah. So that was great. We didn't worry about that. But it was, as I say, I was very proud to have been involved in it, as was Louise and everybody that was in it. And again, to reiterate, we didn't realize, even when it was over, you don't sit around going, well, there's a cultural experience that people would be talking about. We had no idea it would resonate in a way that it has. So I'm very proud to have been connected to it. It was great. Yeah.
So, I mean, thanks so much for joining us today, David. Quite a boast. That's fantastic. And I mean, you've directed and produced Crystal Maze and Live Aid and all these great shows, but Lance Corporal Boiled Egg. I mean, if nothing else.
That's the highlight of my career.
That's on the headstone.
That is the highlight of my career, doing that sketch. But no, seriously, thank you so much for having me on.
Thanks so much, David. It's incredible.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you all for listening to this edition of Quite a Boast. Special thanks to Matt Lucas for permission to use the Peanuts music as our theme tune, and thanks to Ed Lewis for this edit. Thank you to Jake Chesham for permission to use the photo from his 1995 shoot of Jim and Bob in our various online locations for the podcast. And of course, thank you very much to Jim Moyer and Bob Mortimer, without whom this podcast, well, it just wouldn't exist, would it? Remember to check out Paula's Divine Comedians podcast as well, and to join the Reeves Mortimer Depository of Curious Stuff Facebook group. And I think you'll agree that really was a lot of fun. Goodbye.